Hey guys, here on Launchpad, getting to interview another amazing person within the industry, somebody who's doing something completely unique, one of a kind, something that blows my mind, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. But get an opportunity to interview Ryan Harrell. He is one of the, I guess, game changers when it comes to tattoo artists and tattoo studios, and locations. Ryan has tattoo studios on military bases, on multiple military bases, and has probably more to come, which I'm interested in learning more about. But I don't want to hog the introductions. Ryan, I'd love for you to kind of share with everyone, a little bit of your background, and we'll kind of build in from there.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate that. I did out of college. I went to school for architecture, and I guess you got to be good at math to be an architect. So I ended up not going down that path. I went down the business marketing side of things. I wanted to do something that was creative where I could draw. So I went into marketing, graphic design, which led to website design. It was the late 90s. Everybody was doing it. So I jumped right in. Search engine optimization, then social media, branding. I ended up selling a few of my agencies. One was websites and SEOs, another one's social media, and then I had a full service agency. And in 2014, I decided after a divorce, it was time for me to try something different. And I got out, I started doing some consulting, and I met my wife, Nicole, she's been in and out of the business for about 20 years. And she, when she was in college, and she learned how to pierce. And then after she got out, as any good teacher does, because she was a teacher, she had her part-time job piercing and working the counter. And when that studio became open, she bought it and named it a terrible name. And so she brought me in to say, hey, if I want to brand this differently. How do I? And so that's how I got into the tattoo industry. I had a good friend named Chop, who owns Chop Shop here in Hope Mills outside of Fayetteville. So I kind of known about, I've been tattooed. I knew about all the studios in town and whatnot, but I didn't know anything about the tattoo industry when I got into it. And it was such an eye-opening experience. I use my experience in government contracting, because we did have websites with the government, and I had a lot of government contractors that we did work for, and I reached out and said, hey, I want to advertise on base, which you can do at any base. And so one of my contacts said, hey, they're going to put a tattoo shop on a military base. And I said, holy shit, that's me, let's do it. But it took years after I found that out too. I mean, I was sending them like Happy Tuesday emails out of nowhere, just pick me type of thing. I had no idea that they'd been working on it since the early 2000s, because after South Carolina made tattooing legal, the bases in Charleston reached out to AFEs in the military and said, we need to put this on base. And it took them a long time to come around and find the right partner. And then once they found the right partner, it took even longer to get it open, because they realized there was no regulations federally, and the state regulations weren't as strict and stringent as they wanted to. So it took us from the first time we opened. 2016 is when we started communicating with them. 2020 is our first one's open. We opened up 3 really quickly, and then they realized this is going to be a lot bigger. We have about 26 on our list, and we have 9, including one that just opened. And so that puts us at 6 total open, with 8 more in build out currently for this 2023, first part of 2024. So,
Damn. Well, that was a lot, brother. I mean, that was a lot to unpack, and I want to kind of dissect some of that, because like I said, it was an entourage, and what I meant by it was really unique to me, because I'm a military brat. I grew up on military bases, and the fact that they didn't have tattoo shops then and they got them now kind of disappoints me. I could have been in the craft a lot earlier, I think, or at least been getting more exposure as opposed to the experience I had. But that's really cool. And again, being a military, but I think that's awesome. And it's very military life is near and dear. And I think it's really cool that they're allowing that, because I mean, we can't deny that that's how tattooing got everywhere, right? That's our foundation, the military personnel bringing the ink across seas and the different locations. So that's cool. You have that kind of essence and heritage. And now I just got to ask, I know you, like you said, you got out of college, after divorce, met your wife, and she had a horrible tattoo name. What was it?
It was called Skin Prick City. And I was like, and it was spelled different. It was spelled weird. And I'm like, you don't misspell stuff like this. It's going to be tough to figure out. It needs to be easy to spell, easy to remember. I'm trying to go over things. And she's like, no, this is what I've always wanted to name it, you know? And I'm like, well, the late 90s when you probably thought of this, the early 2000s, it's a different time, let's figure something that fits our demographic, So after a while, actually, we were talking to Joey Tattoo, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about changing the name. And he was like, thank you. What are you going to change it to? And I told him, he goes, yeah, that's what you need to do. Change it now. And so Nicole looked at me and said, okay, I guess you're right. Let's change it. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, skin prick. I mean, that's got a whole plethora of other connotations to it. So.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's cool. No, I mean, you definitely got a great, a new. I mean, what you've decided to change the name now is amazing. Would you go ahead and tell everyone the name of your studio and your enterprise?
Yeah, it's American Tattoo Society is our studios, and we also have the All American Tattoo Convention. We throw events on base, and then we have the large convention outside of Fayetteville and Fort Bragg, or in Fayetteville outside of Fort Bragg. So that's in April. So
did you say that you have a convention on base?
We hold events on base. They're wanting to do conventions on base, but we have to have. We're talking to a few different bases about doing it because. They either had them before AFES decided that there was going to be a tattoo studio on base, and then they said you can't do that anymore, or they just are pushing the envelope and thinking instead of a tattoo contest, let's actually have a convention. But it's going to require public health and some of these regulatory bodies that the Army's put in place to be okay with us bringing at least 50 or so tattoo artists in there, permitting them at once, and all that good stuff. So.
Well, something you mentioned before, and like you said, what is the dynamic of like having a shop on base with like non-military? Do you tattoo a lot of non-military too, or is it just mostly the servicemen and women?
No, we tattoo if they can get on base. And I think COVID kind of messed things up, right? Because COVID, you could go to a base and say, I want to go on base, I want to go see the exchange, I want to go to the MWR, whatever, and you can get a day pass or a 24, 48-hour pass and get on base. COVID kind of changed that. So some of the bases are coming open. Fort Bliss, for instance, you can get a day pass, especially if they have an event on base, which that may have changed with the immigrant issues that they've had in El Paso. But if you can get on base, you can get tattooed. Now, the only restriction with the new regulations that were just put in place, we can't tattoo outside of our regulations for that base. So if you're in an Army base, I can tattoo Army stuff. Regulation wise, it doesn't matter if you're retired, a dependent, whatever. I have to stay in the Army regulations, which is a little bit of a bummer, but it works because now the folks that are working the counter don't have to worry about like, is this going to be, am I going to get in trouble for tattooing this person? Because sometimes they come in and say, give me this tattoo that's going to affect my my livelihood, and we're like, no, you can't do that. And they say, well, it's okay, they don't care, and they're really just trying to get a cool tattoo or get out or whatever. They're going to get in a lot of trouble, and that's not us. But so it kind of takes a lot of the guessing work out. So
can you explain that a little bit more? Meaning, like you said, there's like Army regulations on tattoos versus like other branches, or what does that mean? Like the placement, subject matter.
So subject matter is pretty much all the same. No, you can't discriminate. It can't be sexist or any of those racist, all those different things, right? But every branch has its own uniform policy for tattoos. So the Marines, for instance, down here at Camp Lejeune, October before last, they cut the, they couldn't get anything below the sleeve. So anything at the cut of the elbow, 2 inches above, 2 inches below, that was a no-go zone. Couldn't get tattooed there. From the 2 inches below the elbow line to 2 inches above the wrist line, you can only get one tattoo where your hand could cover it. So they removed that, and all of the Marine folks can get full sleeves now. The Army can get one by 1 inch square tattoo or a 1 inch circle tattoo on their hand. They can get stuff all between their fingers now. What I'm finding is that these branches are they're not necessarily looking to us, but they're looking to the military, this kind of group that put together the regulations and stuff to say, hey, we're having we're having issues retaining, recruiting. Everyone's tattooed. They're using it as a way to, screen people out, but they're missing out on good soldiers, good airmen. And so when they started getting looser with the regulations, allowing full sleeves, allowing for different, types of tattoos in different areas, on the neck and whatnot, the back of the neck, the behind the ear. It's opened up a lot more recruits that were interested in going. And I only see that getting more lenient, more towards like a Navy policy, because the Navy can get hands and feet, and they can get anything tattooed. As a matter of fact, they can get their neck and knuckles with a waiver, and they don't deny waivers for the Navy. So if they come in and want it, they can get it. And it really pisses off everybody that's not in the Navy when they see those posters sitting up on their walls and it has everyone's stuff, and then Navy's like, whatever you want, guys. And then, the guys are pissed because they can't get their hands done or they can't get their knuckles done. But it's just, it's what Uncle Sam wants. So.
When I was in the Air Force, it was a quarter of the exposed body part. So the exposed body part was only a quarter. And I remember being so jealous of other folks who had tattoos. So, but that's cool. I mean, and you're right. I mean, the government can't help but recognize that this is something everybody's got, and especially the younger generations, the people that we want in the military to, obviously being involved with these types of activities, right? They got to allow that, which also speaks to a lot of just that tattooing, is something that's intrinsic to all of us. I mean, and especially to the military. Like I said, I mean, without the military, we wouldn't have tattooing spread like it did. So, I appreciate that. That's cool to understand. You gotta know which shop you're on and how it's regulated, because it sounds like you got a lot of tattoo shops. I mean, you start out with 3 right away, and is this all Army, or we spread across? You said, I know you're in Camp Lejeune, so that's a Marine Corps, but then we hitting up different types of branches right now, or
so the Marine Corps and Navy, we just do events on base. We don't we're not actually tattooing on base yet. We're hoping that soon, with the regulation changes with the Marines, that the Air Force and Army are kind of grouped together as far as their bases are concerned. The Navy and the Marines are grouped together with their bases. So I have a DoD contract, global one. So whenever they're ready, we're ready. But right now we're just on Army and Air Force bases tattooing with our studios, and we have 3 on Air Force bases, and we got 1 on Army bases. I have 3 more Army bases and 5 more Air Force bases coming up this year. So it's spread across those 2. We also have some international locations we're looking at, but regulations has been something that kind of bit us when we looked to open, especially after we first started open. They kind of laid out all of these possibilities, and places like New York State and Germany and other places where the regulations aren't as cut and dry, or they're non-existent. That made it really tough for the military, because they kind of they're like, oh, we're doing this, we're going by local regulations. And then I'm like, cool, they don't have them. And they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. What do you mean they don't have them? There's got to be some federal regulations. There's got to be something. I'm like, no, there's not. So that's kind of hampered a few of our locations. But the ones that are opening now are all in locations where we either have local regulations, or there's some coming. There's something that the health department or the local environmental health has worked out with the base to be able to give us a permit. We'd have to have a local permitting authority to permit our studio and artist, and then they regulate it. So they come in bi-weekly for the first couple months, and then after the first couple months they go quarterly, and then I haven't got that far yet, but hopefully we'll get to yearly, where they only come in once a year and check us out. But they come by and they have a 64-point inspection for the studio. So every 2 weeks they're coming by and reviewing that, on top of all the paperwork and all the different stuff that we have to do. It gets kind of wild, but it's what they require. It's not too far out of our scope, for us to do it, because our counter folks are more like salespeople for our artists. So,
and just to clarify, so you're saying the individual bases and their leadership requires the state or the city or the local area to come on and do these extensive type of inspection?
Yeah. So we have the Surgeon General of the Army and the Air Force have, and then the head of public health for both, have signed off on the new regulations, which is it's just a modified body art model code from Nihal. And then they worked with Steve Joyner and the folks over there to figure out because when we first started opening, and they realized that all these places that wanted bases couldn't get them, they're like, well, wait, what do you mean they can't get on base? And some of the health departments are like, we're not legally able to permit a studio on base. And some of them had said, it's fine, we'll do it anyway. Just give me your money. I'm and we just want to come on base, and we'll treat it like a special event or something. And then the Army was like, well, what the fuck is going on? Like, what do you mean you're not going to come on base? Like, this is insane. And so they asked me for more clarity, and I'm like, well, I thought we talked about this. It's really tough. Every state is different. Every county inside the state is different. Permitting fees, how you submit, how you pay, all those things. And it just kind of blew their mind that there wasn't some sort of, you don't go to school. So anyone can get a tattoo permit. And I'm like, yeah, basically. If you know which way to wipe the alcohol and you got 70% and you got your right stuff, they don't say, are you able to do this? Or have you been trained? They just want to know, have you paid the fee? Do you have the stuff in there? And they were like, well, who comes by and regulates? Who comes by and makes sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? I'm like, nobody. They come out once a year, maybe, depending on the state. And it's just kind of, that's what got them to get public health involved. They kind of pumped the brakes on our other, we had locations ready to open. And we were literally a day before a grand opening in Mississippi and at another Air Force base. And they said, wait a second, this is insane. We have to figure this out. And that's when we started working on the regulations with the Army. Then the Air Force took those regulations and put them in place. So what they require is that a studio is said, the studio and the artist are signed off by a local permitting authority. And then because they can't get on base, the public health department for the Army and for the Air Force are both able to do that now. They're able to come on base. They're able to go into our studios and permit it. We've done training with them. AFES ourselves. AFES is the part of the DoD that leases space on base. So if you want to set up a restaurant or a clothing store, whatever on base, you go to AFES and they rent it out. That's who our contract is with. And so AFES, I mean, they've been over backwards for the Army and found the Body Art Model Code, brought them to Knee Hall. They're going to conventions. They're going to, board meetings, and they're saying, like, this is what we want to do. And they came to me and I said, well, I know Steve. I know the Knee Hall guys that are on the list. This is a solid start. I know you guys are going to edit it, and they didn't edit too much of it, but, that's kind of how the permitting works right now. It may change in the future, but to something that's all encompassing, meaning the military permits, does the permitting and does the regulations to it, like making sure that everything's right coming in. But as of right now, it's just a local permitting authority. And then now for the base, there's a whole host of things they have to do. There's requirements for the space, requirements for the lighting, there's requirements for the ventilation, floor, ceilings, all that stuff. That's all handled before we get there. That's all that stuff is being done on those 8 additional bases that we're working on right now. So some of them are waiting for bathroom installs. Some of them are waiting on, the flooring to be pulled out, asbestos. It's really big to run asbestos tests on base. So everything that's in everything gets tested for asbestos all the time before you come in to do any construction. Mm-hmm. And then, they've kind of they've given me the ability to do my own contracting on base. So that is fun and interesting. So. Yeah.
They say the military is good about upkeep. So I'm sure those buildings have been around since they, built the base.
Oh yeah.
Probably some of the tools they still use to maintain it as well. So yeah, again, just kind of dissecting, it sounds like the AFES, especially like the Air Force, has their own kind of version of the NEHA Body Art Model Code they utilize.
Yes. They do,
And then they have the, like you said, there's like a local sign off that just basically they just verify. They take that Body Art Model Code from AFES and share that with the local authority, saying, hey, we're going to have this on base. And then they don't come on base, they don't do any inspections, it's all handled through.
It depends on what the regulations are. So Southern Nevada, for instance, at Nellis Air Force Base, they come on. At El Paso, Fort Bliss, they do not come on. And then at some bases, they don't regulate the, in some states, some counties, they don't regulate the actual studio. They're handing out cards to the artist. So in California, the artists get permitted separately from the studio. The studio gets permitted once a year. And then other places, they come out every time. North Carolina comes out every time an artist gets permitted. They check the shop and they check the artist. So they will come on base, but they're checking for their local regulations. So if their local regulations say this person can tattoo with a studio, then they're good. They're good with that. They're the ones that permit that. And so we have at every studio, at every location, they have whatever state, whatever permitting authority, we have a permit for the artist and for the studio. And then the actual regulatory portion of it, like Do you have distilled water? Regulate medical waste. Is that taken care of? All that's handled on base through the NEHAL regulations, the body art model code that the Army is actually the Army body art model code. So they put it in place as the Army, and then the Air Force, being the smart guys they are, guys and girls, they just took that and they're actually using that, and it says the Army regulations. And then in one of the meetings, the guy said, "Should we just scratch out Army and put Air Force?" And he's like, "No, we ain't worried about it. That's extra work." So I said, "Damn it, it's right what they say about you guys."
It's good enough for government work.
Yeah, he said, well, they were like, "Well, the Army is to a T with a lot of that stuff anyway, so let's just stick with what they got going on." So
yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like it's extremely complex, right? Like there's a lot of depending on where you're at, you have to navigate the local, you have to then kind of insert how the Army regulates it and such. So I mean, that just kind of speaks to how it's just so difficult to get licensed in general, because you mentioned earlier, like coming on and doing these like multiple inspections, it's like a lot of states will see an inspector once a year, every other year, or less, right? Depending on the location, which is can have its positive and negative depending on the location and the situation. Now now with having these many bases, I mean, you have a lot of artists, right? And so you have a lot of like kind of navigating that depending on which area you're in, because like say I think you mentioned, well, I know like Texas, and I'm not sure if it's placed in Texas, but like the establishment's the only license required. The artists themselves don't require it. But then you said in California, there's like two separate licenses.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you navigate that between the two, in the sense of, even though you're in a state that only the establishment is required, you then use the Army body art model code to ensure that your artists are licensed too, or?
Well, so what happens is I'm going to go to a new base. Let's say our next one's going to be Columbus, Georgia, at Fort Benning, right? So the first thing that happens is I go to the public health at Fort Benning, and I say, "Hey, we're looking to open," or APs does. So I'm looking to open, and then it's up to the public health to get trained. So they come and meet with us, and those folks have already been trained. But for the folks that have not, the Charleston, for example, we're getting ready to move to Charleston and work on a base there. And they don't have, that studio is a little bit different because those public health officials haven't been trained yet. So they have to go through this training, which is myself, the AFES, public health folks, and public health for the Air Force or Army, depending on which base I'm on. So they go in and get trained by them first. And then once all that stuff's hammered out, then they come back to us, and then we meet with them. And then that's when we hammer out the logistics of things with public health to say, okay, so this is a place where two are separated, or two are permitted independently. So, and then they write their own SOP for that base for the public health. We have our SOPs, which I know when we talked earlier, I said, well, we have these SOPs which have everything in it, but there's so much junk in there. It's like, how do you get on base? Like, where can you stay close by? Like, what's the off limits? I mean, all kind of stuff that they've asked us to put in there for our artists, because when an artist comes on base, they get a packet of things. They have to sign off on HIPAA training. They got to sign off on regulated medical waste, hazardous materials, so many different types of training on top of knowing how to get permitted and what's allowed. And then they have to read, the 300-page body art model code or whatever that we have going on. So if someone, we have a ton of traveling artists. So whenever they come to us and they go through the signing all the paperwork and stuff, when they get to the end, I'm like, this guy really wants to come for sure, because he just went through, signed a shitload of training. Whether he read it or not, it's on him, but him or her, but at least we did our part. We trained them on it, so.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, it sounds like it's a nightmare just to get your regular artist license. I can only imagine trying to have like a guest artist come through and do all this just for whatever period of time they're able to come,
Yeah, but once they come, usually they come back. So we, because they'll get those folks aren't. I mean, they're there for 3-4 years, 5, 6, depending. Our Air Force guys, I guess, don't move around as much as the Army folks. So, they do a lot of training, a lot of red flags and stuff. So they're kind of in and out, but they're always at the base. So you go for 2 weeks. We pay for your flights, and we have a house and car and stuff you can drive. And then after you get there, you start having your regulars, and you're like, well, I'm going to come back in another month. ATS is paying for it anyway. So I just fly out, get, tattoo some more, come back out next time whenever my, clientele needs me to come out. So it is pretty cool. There's a lot of hoops to jump through initially, but Kirsten and the admin team really do a good job of laying it all out for the artist to say, this is what you need to tattoo on base. We have to run our background check. Then Uncle Sam runs his special background check, which sees all the stuff we don't see. And then you got to, then once that's good, then you sign all this paperwork and this training. And then, then we submit you to see if you can even get on base and get a base pass and all that fun stuff. The background check from Uncle Sam usually tells us that, but we never really know. Someone could have had a, suspended license in the meantime or something, something really minor that depending on the security of the base, they can't get on, so someone could literally have drugs and guns in their past and still get on to some bases. But another guy could have like an expired title, registration or something. He can't get onto one of the more secure bases. So it's kind of, how the security stuff works. It's a little tricky at each base, and there's no standard protocol. And maybe we need to go into that with the Air Force. They don't have any standardization with that, but there's no if you're here or there, it's kind of up in the air, and whether it's a Bravo or Alpha, depending on the security status of the base, things change then too. So, but once you're permitted as an artist to come on, then you can come on anytime. So well, no, I guess that does lend itself to a lot of longevity, right? If somebody's willing to, like I said, and go through the packet, go through all the hoops, then, and being that you take such good care of them, I'm sure then that keeps you really stocked with a lot of repeat artists, as well as probably traveling artists that eventually become like resident artists, I'm sure. Sure. I have traveling artists that are with us, for 3-4 months out of the year. So they have their own studio, they have their own stuff going on, but for 3 or 4 months, 2 weeks at a time, a month at a time, they're traveling, so it's perfect for artists that want to travel. They come to do a convention on the East Coast and hit a few of our shops and then scoot back over to the West Coast or vice versa. So it is pretty neat. The training portion of it, all the sign-offs and all that stuff does get a little tricky, but once, like you said, once they get through that, then I'm like, you really want to come on. So, and that's usually, if they can pass the background checks and everything, they're usually pretty solid folks. So,
Let's say I commend you for doing all this, Ryan, because I mean, in general, tattoo licensure can be its own hurdles, and from the lack of as much participation that you're getting from like the government, right? Like they're really strict on wanting to, ensure that they have the proper training, the proper background checks and such, and vice versa. Sometimes in the state, like you said, you go in and like, can I get licensed? They're like, I don't know who does that. I don't know which office does that. I mean,
100%.
Somewhere else.
So they're like, our county doesn't handle that. That goes from the state. And you're like, shit. I mean, in Texas, I had to have a state permit. I had to have all this stuff to even apply for my artist to go there. But then they didn't even really care about the studio. El Paso did. The county in El Paso did. But there's other counties in Texas where they're like, don't worry about the studio. As long as you pay the state, you're good to go. This is just wild, but
and that makes it so difficult. I mean, in general, I mean, I think that most tattoo artists, and most body artists in general, just have a hard time with licensure because of the uncertainty, depending on not only the state, but county, freaking blocker on. It depends on the inspector that day, and like how they're feeling and what's going to happen at that point. But with all this, I mean, you mentioned earlier, you're talking about. You have like 26 bases coming up. Was that what you said?
Yeah. So we have there's things that they have to do, and this is from like the actual location, ventilation, all that stuff. If they meet all these certain requirements, they can apply. The base can apply to AAFES and to the Surgeon General's office to get an ATS location on base. And if they do that and everything passes, then they're added to our list. And then once the public health and the folks on base have all their stuff together for that, then we move forward with adding them to our contract. So there's 26 right now, which have done almost everything, but there's only 8 more that have everything ready to go. And I expect some of them could possibly never get added to the list, because of issues with regulations. Like Japan is one of them, and Japan has. They just decriminalized tattooing. It was illegal there. Sure. So now it's like decriminalized, but there's still no regulations. So, they want us in Japan, but the military is like, hold up, there's no regulations off base. I'm like, well, I mean, it's good enough in Texas. Like, just take my Texas permit and whatever, Japan. But that's not quite. That's not how the regulations are written. And unfortunately, the Army is very strict with the regulations, how they write them, and what they expect from different verbiage. So whenever they said there's no local permitting authority, they're like, sorry, can't work around that. But
yeah, well, whenever there's a need or a problem, things obviously eventually come and fill that need or kind of rectify that problem. And you kept mentioning NEHA, and NEHA we know stands for the National Environmental Health Association, and they've created a body art model code, which and maybe from your experience, I know we had several body piercers as well as government agents and a few tattoo artists kind of getting involved with this. But what is your kind of understanding of it, and how that's been introduced to the military surgeon general, and like you mentioned, you guys are going to NEHA meetings and such. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit more as to what it is and what we could potentially expect from it.
Well, the body art model code covers a lot of. It's not just tattooing. It covers mutilation and scarification and piercing and all that. And so it's a very all encompassing regulatory document. But some of that doesn't fit us. We can't pierce. We can't do anything on base like that. Can't do permanent makeup. We can only tattoo inside regulations. So getting a model code that's that robust was tricky. I mean, I don't know how many iterations and revisions we had with them, and we tried to explain what they meant on different things. And we even got Steve on the three-way one day and said, Steve, what did you mean when you said this? Because we had interpretation issues with it. But their new revisions they're working on right now are going to hopefully clear up any of those language issues. Because just because we use stuff in a certain way doesn't mean that the FDA or the government uses it the same way. Single use, individual use are the same thing to the FDA, but it's not the same thing in the tattoo industry. Ink is single use, meaning we use it till it's gone and then we throw it away. Individual use, meaning you use it on one client and then you throw it away. Well, FDA and the military, they use single and individual interchangeably. So some of these things are coming up, and NEHAL recognized it right away. I mean, it's throwing hell with our distilled water situation on base, but until they do the regulations, we'll be able to hopefully fix that. But the NEHAL, their code is great. I mean, it covers a lot of stuff, and it's going to help. I mean, I feel like that code, and it's a step in the right direction, because when I first got into the industry and started working, I was a counter guy for a while at the studio before we started expanding, and I just remember thinking, I can get a permit today? Are you kidding me? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. This is insane. And and I thought this has got to be a problem one day. I just know it, because it was tattooing just became so big so fast. 6 years ago, there was not a wireless tattoo machine. You had a bracelet maybe, or something like that. You carried your battery around if you wanted to do it that way. But now you can pretty much set up anywhere. And with all that change and all that corporate money and all that attention going into it, it was bound to be that regulatory bodies started looking at, this is something else we can regulate, And so I feel like NEHAL, and although all the people that are APT, all the ones that are standing up right now saying, wait a second, we need to have a say in this instead of having someone else have a say for us. I think that really came up during COVID, right? All these states were closing us down with close personal care service businesses, then trying to open us up with strip clubs and bars. And I'm like, wow, that's not the same, man. It's not. A tattoo shop is not a strip club. I mean, we get as close as they do sometimes, but it ain't the same. So, and my old business partner was a state senator, and he called me during COVID. He was on the reopening committee, and he said, "There's no one for the tattoo industry down here. Why?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you mean for the call me? I'll come." And he's like, "No. There's everybody from gyms to tanning beds. So they have a lobbyist or someone who's down here working for them in every state to try to get them open sooner. Why don't the tattoo industry have anything?" And I said, "But I couldn't tell you, man. I really don't know. There's organizations like ABT in those, and they put out some good guidelines. But I think that having NEHAL and having these folks and everyone standing up right now is going to hopefully beat regulation to the punch, because if we're not the ones that are having something to do or having a say in the regulation, we'll be regulated. So I'm happy with NEHAL. I'm happy with what Steve and Katie, all the guys are doing. with me Hall. They've been extremely easy to talk to and get in touch with and answer any questions about the stuff that's in there. So I feel like the Body Art Model Code is pretty solid, and I'm a little biased because I've literally read it 1,000 times when I was doing revisions and stuff. But any code that someone who's in the industry, tattoo artists, piercers, whatever, can look at and say, yeah, this is cool, is going to be light years ahead of anything someone else can draft up, because they don't know. Whenever my partner brought me and I talked to the Department of Health Services from North Carolina, and I said, this is how we clean, this is what we do, and they're like, we had no idea. What we think of tattoo shops and what's actually happening in tattoo shops now are two completely different things. And if we would have known that, we never would have took y'all off the close personal care services and put you underneath strip clubs. We would have kept you right where you were. And so I think that part opened up a lot of people's eyes when they, the Florida folks, who, even as conservative as a state as Florida is, they were still trying to keep them closed for 6 months longer than barbers and beauty and all the other folks that they close them down with. So, if you can have a massage, you can get a tattoo, right? So I don't understand why they were thinking it wouldn't be a thing. So I think the regulatory stuff is needed, and I'm glad that Knee Hall has put together something. Whether it gets adopted or they use another one, I think all of them are step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I feel you. Here in my state of New Mexico, same thing, man. They were trying to keep us up, closed as long as gyms, which maybe not strip clubs, but gyms, it's a different scenario situation. But yeah, we did have to berate our governor to get us to open up closer to dental offices, because we use the same type of hospital grade disinfectant, sterilization procedures, almost have the same kind of setup. If anything, we're not in their mouth, right? So that was it was a win to a degree here. But you're right, so many other places went unrepresented. And speaking of kind of having something in place by people who are within our industry, kind of creating this body art model code. Just to kind of clarify, the body art model code would be something that's potentially not going to be adopted per state, because it'd be something that's federally adopted. Basically the country, the federal government would say, hey, this is now the foundation for all states to regulate tattooing. Is that something that you see in the horizon with your interactions with the Surgeon General for the military, or any talks about that? Because that's kind of a good idea to know, because then people could become more familiar with it.
Sure.
And when we're more familiar with it, then it's less scary, right? Then we can understand it and know what is required of us.
Well, so the Surgeon General's office of both the Army and the Air Force, but mainly the Army, and AFIs, public health officials, they dug into a few different codes, and they're like, well, we have to write something that we can train our public health on. And when they started looking into it, they were the ones that actually said, hey, we're thinking about using Knee Hall's body art model code. And I'm like, well, I'm okay with that. That's a good one. And they're like, yeah, from the time that we started working with them with the 2016 or 17, until our last training, which was a few months back at Nellis Air Force Base for the Air Force, there's at least a handful of people that say, wait a second, there's no federal regulation here. And we're like, no, there's no federal regulation anywhere. We don't have it. It's based off state and county. And someone high up usually says, this is insane, they should fix this, And Knee Hall is who they went to. That's who they have been, because they have environmental health services on base. So they go to their conferences, and the public health officials go to those too. So they already have a pre-existing relationship with Knee Hall because they have environmental health services on base. So yeah, I think that was the easy way for them. But to answer your question, I 100% think that there's going to be some sort of guidance coming from the government in the future that's going to say, whether that's the body art model code, which we're using to permit on base or regulate on base, or whether that is some other code that gets drafted somewhere else through legislation. Whatnot, I feel like that's going to happen. Now, how much they may do the state county thing where they say, this is our overarching umbrella, this is what you guys need to use, submit that out to the states, and the states disseminate it down to the counties. I know that states like New York have been working on state regulations that if you're a city, or like New York City or maybe some of the larger cities there that could produce their own. But I'm the way that I'm kind of seeing it happen is they would give loose guidance through the body art model code to the states, and the states would be like, okay, let's just enact this, and it would be up to the local health. And something that we're finding too at our state level in North Carolina is that public health departments are getting cut. So we used to have 3 inspectors in Cumberland County outside of Fort Bragg, and we only have 1. So there's only 1 day a week where we can submit permits and get permitted. And it's been insane to try to get that, with all the stuff that we have going on. There's only 1 day that Kirsten can go downtown and submit permits and do whatever. This cannot be a local thing to Cumberland County. It has to be nationwide. There has to be cutbacks all across. And so if we don't have some sort of regulatory, if we don't have some sort of, I'm not going to say regulatory body, but if we have some sort of document that we can disseminate down from the top, I think that's going to help a lot of like counties and states to say, there's a lot of shit anyway. Let's just do it this way, what that regulation ends up being, I think, is kind of up in the air, because I haven't heard for say 100% this is going to be the thing. But I can tell you every time I meet with someone, whether it's the brass at AFES or someone with the Surgeon General's Public Health Department, and they think like every single time they're like, well, there's no federal regulations, and the state regulations are because they're not over just one base, right? They're over multiple bases minimum. And so they have Mississippi licenses, which you can just basically say, hey, I'm permitted in Florida and get a permit. And then they have Texas, where the artist is permitted. It has nothing to do with any other state. And they're just blown away that everything is going to be different each time, and they got to train differently, and there's going to be a different SOP and all that. So I could definitely see it happening. I just don't know on what, capacity. So,
yeah, I mean, what I see, the NEHA's body art model code, like you're saying, could be a federally mandated statute, which all states would then use as an outline to kind of, like you said, disseminate throughout their area. Because an example in here in New Mexico, we have the Body Art Safe Practice Act, which is the statute, which is similar to NEHA's body art model code. It's some general good guidelines, but not very detailed. Not very truly into the weeds of the day-to-day operations, other than just a board should regulate tattooing, in this particular manner. And then it's on those individual states or cities or counties to kind of break it down and make it more detailed, and then train their inspectors and the tattooers from there. Which, like you're saying, it's inevitable. I mean, we're at that point where, you're just talking now, the military is recognizing that they're going to let virtually all the military personnel be sleeved up, like tattoos on their neck and their head and their face. I mean, it's just going to become so commonplace where they're going to have something. So we know that's in the horizon, and we're glad that there is something put in place that's not detrimentally scary, that you and I believe some of us that are able to read are pretty much comfortable with it. But that's something that's like tomorrow, today we're dealing with something that's a little bit more pertinent. It's the MOCRA, right? The Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act. And that's the bill, that's the once law now bill, what's bill now law, that's going to actually affect manufacturing, especially inks and products and such. And I'm just curious, is there any like conversations about that with the military surgeon general, or are they just still kind of, I know it's fairly new, but any information there?
No. So there's not with this new, not the Modernization Act, there's not, but I do know that whenever the REACH compliant laws were passed, there was some communication with APs to say, what's going on? Is there carcinogens in the ink? Like what's happening? And I'm like, no, look, at least my understanding is the FDA came in and looked at the facilities that made ink, but they weren't actually, because it was a cosmetic, they weren't actually regulating the tattoo ink. And now they're just looking to regulate the tattoo ink. And I know that in talking with you, the main difference is that theirs was a chemical and ours is an injectable cosmetic, which makes it way easier. It opens up more things for us to be able to use in the ink. So I don't know that it's going to be an issue like it was with REACH, but they were concerned that there was no oversight on the inks. And so that's when we started having to go into ink log tracker, which track lot numbers and all those good things, to expiration dates, all that. So every artist has a login; they can track all that stuff, and that all came after I actually got a call and said, "Can you be in Dallas this weekend?" And I had to say, "Yeah, sure." And I just flew to Dallas, and it was like, "Can you log ink lots?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I can do that." Really? That's what I come out here for? Never been in Dallas, so let's go eat some alligator or whatever. But that was right after the Reach the Reach compliance stuff was passed in the UK, and it kind of I think I don't know that had anything to do with them wanting to really push for a uniform code for regulations on base, but I know that it had something to do with it, So whether or not they push for us to have or they ask us to do anything compliancy wise for that, I'm not 100% sure, but I know that it did perk some interest in at least in the military about why are they outlawing certain inks in the UK, And I'm like, well, we eat Fruity Pebbles over here and they don't eat it in 30 other countries, so I mean it's going to be all right, man.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's just confusing all the way around for a lot of different elements and aspects, whether it's the military or now on the federal and state. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to be kind of hashed out, but there is some concerns that things could look the way they are in Europe, but I think the most important thing is that people start to recognize that something has happened, right? And things are changing, and there will be not only potentially disruptive regulations that are going to affect our products, whether it's a tattoo pigment that we actually insert in the skin, or something we put on the top of the skin, or eventually just having a state that maybe at one point had no sort of regulations. Now there's a federal statute, the Body Art Model Code. Now they're going to have to adopt and kind of get used to licensure and that stuff. I mean, it's happening, and I think the biggest hurdle that a lot of artists face is, like, I'm sure people are sitting down that could listen to this conversation and be like, man, I couldn't even handle half of what you're just dealing with. Like, not only, is it confusing dealing with the state level, but then, throwing in the other layers, right? And that in itself is causing a lot of just fear, and that causes people to kind of retract and detract when really it just sounds like the government, the military just was like, hey, we want to have tattoo shops on base, man. Why don't you guys come on over? Hey, by the way, how you regulated? We're not. What? Well, then give us something. Like, what do you need? And I think that's something that a lot of artists don't really recognize. The government's not like, they're not always going to be. We want to enslave you. We want to help. We want to do what we got to do, and we need your input. And I think it's so important that tattoo artists recognize that there is a place to get information. There's a place and a space and groups of people that can come together. And you did mention one of the oldest organizations, the APT, right? The Alliance of Professional Tattooists. They are recognized by the federal government, which I don't know if the military does, but it's a long-standing constituent base of tattoo artists that have been teaching health and safety to the industry for, like I said, over 30 years. Does the military recognize them at all by chance, or has there been talks of that? Or
well, I know they asked us if we were affiliated with them way back in the day, and I told them no. To my knowledge, back then, I didn't know what they were doing. As far as now, it seems like Mucker's like the first domino to fall, right? And it doesn't. The regulation doesn't happen like tomorrow we wake up and everyone's got a Body Art Model Code we have to follow to the T. It happens a domino at a time. And then before you look up, you're like, holy shit, now I can't use 99% of my inks. I can't do this. I can't do that. When if we were there the whole time, then we could have, possibly, I'm not saying we would have, but we could have possibly given some insight, which would have maybe steered that in a different direction. And so, and that there's going to be some sort of regulatory influence coming from all different angles, right? Cosmetic tattooing has now got cosmetic companies involved. So now cosmetic companies with their vast, pocketbooks are throwing all kind of stuff at it, which could help or hurt us depending. And I think that we need to have a seat there with the L'Oreal's and all that stuff, So if they're going to be the ones there doing it, then I could see it. I could see it definitely happening. That first domino is always the first. It's always we're like, oh, it's not really that big of a deal, man. They said it's injectable cosmetics, everything will be fine, but not realizing that that's just step one. Step two is figuring out something else. And a great thing about, as you said earlier, is that the government, they realize that tattooing is mainstream now. This, ever since Dave Navarro stood up there and said, "Welcome to Ink Master," for the first time, the industry's changed. And so when you have they realize that, right? And all they really want is to say, give me a way that we can have safe tattooing all base, so we can have safe tattooing state to state. And it'd be something that we can look at and say, that's fucked up. That's right. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, well, you're in Nevada, do whatever, or you're over here, it's the Wild West. They want something that they can kind of point at to say, we're not all over the place here in America. We have our shit together too, UK or whoever. But as long as we're there the whole time, and there's for the suppliers, the ink manufacturers, or someone there with their group, if we can also, if ABT can be there, if the Coalition for Tattoo Safety, if all these different people can be a part of the conversation, then it can only help us. Because if not, then we're going to be looking at 5 colors and having to mix all of our own stuff and 0 additives and all that good stuff, and which is not what we want in our industry. So, and I don't think that, as much as people say, "Oh, I'll just be a pirate and do whatever." Well, it's going to be real tough to be a pirate when you can only choose from 4 or 5 colors, and you have to order them from overseas and all this other stuff. Everyone loves how convenient it is to have supply companies ship to your house overnight, whatever. It's going to be really tough when you have to if you want to get a certain color purple, you have to order it from whatever country, because we don't allow it. And then maybe it gets through customs, maybe it doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, what if it comes from China and it's got God knows what's in that? So
exactly.
Sometimes when you come over restrictive, then you actually open up more windows for people to do things or get things that could be more dangerous. So yeah, I'm 100% behind you, and I truly believe that the APT is a great organization for the practitioner, for the tattoo artist, the people who are actually putting the needle to skin, in the sense of like representing that voice, bringing the industry's interest in mind, focusing it, and then giving it a unified professional voice that not only would the military surgeon general, as well as the federal government, FDA, could listen to. So, and there's a lot of movement there, and we've talked about that. I think it's kind of what spurred our conversation. There's a lot of movement there to get people to come on board, and of course there's a lot of upgrading. You're right, because ABT, like you said, at one point, they've been around for 30 years, and the laws haven't been enough of a scare to get them active, right? Or things have been fairly calm. So now they're kind of reawakening and getting new energy behind it, new bodies, and getting more current to be able to handle the industry coming to it. And in the interim, which is something fairly soon, but in the interim, we've started a database of state regulations. And it's literally on the Discord platform, but it's called the Body Art Regulation Support System. Body Art Regulation Support System, and it's basically a place in a space that tattoo artists, manufacturers of all types, from ink manufacturers to like ointment manufacturers, and we've even had some ex-FDA and some health inspectors on there too, kind of helping close the gap in confusion and start to have conversations about upcoming issues and ways to navigate some of these hurdles. And within it, Al also has something that I think would have been great at some point, years ago when you started. Yeah. It has a breakdown to each U.S. state and how they are regulated. But of course, like you said, man, it can be different per state, per county, per city. So it's still, definitely, we're calling anyone from across the country to come on board and share any of their subjective information and such, whether they know a specific health inspector or if a state's a little different or a county's a little different than the adjoining one. And I feel like if folks can come on board there, learn how we're regulating, communicate with some of these inspectors, communicate with other body art professionals who have experience, and then start to learn more about the APT and get involved as a practitioner, as well as as a manufacturer how they can align themselves too, because there's movement there as well for manufacturers to start coming together. Like you said, we can then start to have our seat at that table and have those conversations, so that way we're not just like, what happened? Like, what are we doing? what? Yeah. I gotta order my inks from Puerto Rico now, you know, like, or whatever, you know. So, yeah, no, it's really cool that you were able to kind of share with us this experience with the military aspect. Because, like I said, man, being a military brat, this is so cool. Like, because I love the history of tattooing. I love where it comes from. I love its its intermingledness with our veterans and our warriors, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's, you know, military personnel, other wars. So you're working on the people who are there when shit's going down. They're ones running towards the shit when people run away from it, right? So you get to adorn their bodies, you get to hear their stories, you get to decorate them and give them their badges of honor from all of the things that they go and they do and they see. So I think that's amazing. That way they don't end up in some ghetto, you know, because, you know, somebody's house, or, you know, how many airmen or army guys are tattooing barracks and shit, you know, like
many times I'm like,
sort of.
We're the first studio on a base, and they're like, "Fuck that, dude! I was tattooed in '89." And I'm like, "Yeah, it was fake, man. It wasn't real. Those are the barracks tattoos are not what you're doing." They're like, "I was definitely tattooed on base before." I'm like, "Okay, legally, you were tattooed here first." So.
Yeah, right. No, I think what's
great about APT is that they've noticed that there's something going on, right? And you know, whether that's through you know, Mokra, or you know, letting people know that stuff's really going down, the first domino is kind of dropping, and hopefully they're going to be able to use a lot of these new tools that weren't available 30 years ago, the internet and these apps, and creating this Discord group, which has I mean, it doesn't just have the state regulations. It's got some marketing stuff on there, I believe, like some self-help type stuff. So there's a lot of good stuff on your Discord group. And then having okay, well, maybe I want to move to here. Maybe I want a guest spot in Virginia, and you pull it up and see exactly what I got to have. And you're like, oh, I already got all that shit, you know, or, okay, Florida requires a different BBP or whatever. If APT and you guys, if there's all these people throwing stuff into the ring to help, you know, tattooing, it can only help things go from here. And just because APT hasn't had they haven't been one of the front charging folks, doesn't mean they can't start now, right? With the people that are there that are looking to make a difference, and in the groups and these conversations that are being had, where we're kind of looking around to say, okay, shit's real now. You know, corporate money's getting involved, the government's getting involved. I think it's time that the tattooers took back tattooing, you know, to a degree, because obviously a certain part of tattooing's gone. It's been gone since, you know, the early 2000s. But if we can keep our hands on it, then it won't get away from us. But if we take our hands off of it, like we have in the past, it gets away from us. So and the, you know, the cool thing about being on a military base too is that there's a whole lot of really cool tattoos that come in and happen. So yeah, we get our Pinterest stuff, you know, whatever, but you get, you know, the guys that come in like, let me just get a fucking whatever, and dragons and daggers and all this cool stuff. You know, we don't necessarily get that as much off base. We get a lot more of the Pinterest, you know, stuff. We get some cool stuff too, but on base, there's a lot of that cool stuff. And I don't want to quit tattooing cool shit, man. I want to keep that up. So if we can get to a point as an industry where we can all look and say like, okay, you're a piercer, you're a shop owner, you're a supply company, you're an ink company, but we're all here for the betterment of tattooing. Then I think that's the direction we all need to be going, right? We need to stop looking at each other like, oh, well, you're this or you're that, and just looking like you're either for tattooing or you're against it, right? And so if what we're doing is good for tattooing, then it's good for everybody. It's good for tattooers, it's good for supply companies, it's good for our customers, it's good for the military, all that. So if we keep moving in that same direction, man, I think that's going to be the best for everybody. So
no, love it. Well said, Ryan. Exactly, because you're right. The government doesn't look at us and see anything different than your body artists. You're all in that body art realm. So we do need to come together and you know, unify ourselves and unify our voice, and like I said, take back what we can and guide it where we need it to go. So I do appreciate you taking the time. I know you're one busy man because you're trying to build 23 tattoo studios simultaneously, and not only do you have to navigate all the issues that us normal tattooers do, you got the government on top. So you know, super grateful for your time. I know that we're going to be putting more information in the post about this, more information about your shops, about your show, you know, links and such, so you can get more information about what you're doing. And I mean, and we, you know, we're really excited to kind of see what these next I'm excited to go to a tattoo convention on a military base. I think it'd be awesome. So definitely
let's do
send out
it.
an invite when that comes around, and send me my application, man. I'll start the 300-page application so I can maybe come guest spot one day in a military base. So.
10-4, man. You got it. I'm on it. I'll make sure Kirsten gets it over to you, and you just get it. Let's make sure we haven't got no crazy shit in your background, and we'll be good to go, man.
I think I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, brother. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for helping coordinate, make this happen. And let's keep up the good fight. Let's get the tattooers and Miller together, and let's safeguard tattooing.
Agree. Thanks for guys for spearheading this and pushing forward with it, because I know that there's a lot of people that are eternally grateful for it. And if they're not now, they will be, or they would have been if you weren't there to do it, and we get regulated to oblivion. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you.